We have been tasked to help the planning department do a lot of the analysis for your neighborhood. So you'll hear a little bit about that tonight. And with me is Anna Mueller, planner with Bolton Nick as well. Two city employees.
Marilyn Draft with Historic Districts.
I'm Justin Ritchie to Charlotte Women's Design Center.
And another fellow consultant will be taking all the results, packaging it to the final plan and work out. So, yes.
Scott Correll with Kittleson and Sophie.
Excellent. So normally you might see Will up here, or maybe we can. So that's a couple emergencies. So I'm standing in and doing my best impersonation of a city employee, which I was for 15 years. So I'm really familiar with this anyway too. And neighborhood. So great to be here. And while we're waiting for technology to catch up, I'll be talking a little bit about the program. This is the second neighborhood meeting we've had. The first one was last week. So this is a process that is new to the city, but a new tool that I'll tell you a little bit about today. Thank you very much. We'll start with a little bit, already done introductions. We understand why you all are here. We really appreciate you being here. We'll start with a little bit about what the overlay is, the summary of that. So you get some context of how it fits into all the other regulatory tools that we have at the city's disposal, but what can and can't do. We'll talk a little bit about the pre-submittal meeting, the initial survey results, which are both on the screen, but also on the boards behind you. And we'll open it up for questions and answers if that works for everyone. Next slide.
Oh, sorry, I'm
Oh,
trying.
you're still doing it.
Yeah, there you go.
So when our new UDO in the city was effective last year, it gave us a number of tools that neighborhoods can use to protect themselves, either from character changes in character, to preserve character, or to reduce the likelihood of displacement. You've seen the kind of opportunities where neighborhoods and people are just getting bigger and bigger, the houses getting bigger and bigger, prices people out, taxes start to go up, all those things. These types of overlays weren't available in our old ordinances, but they are now. One of which is the neighborhood character overlay district. And it can do a lot of things, but what it can't do is control density. So that is set by the base district. So think of zoning is overlaid on every parcel in the city. There's a base district that starts to set standards, and then you can overlay standards on top of that to change them. So what it can't do is limit density. It can't change the types of housing or building types that are already allowed in that base district. It really can't control directly affordability. It can through the size of a structure. It really can't do anything about it doesn't really have anything to say about nuisances. It really doesn't even get into the detail of architectural style, like I live in a Tudor house, or I live in a ranch house, or I live in I don't know, Spanish colonial house. And you can't start to stack these overlays on top of each other. So you can't take, for instance, neighborhood conservation overlay district, neighborhood character overlay, and then put on top of that a residential infill overlay, and then find another overlay and just kind of keep layering things on it. So you get kind of one opportunity. And what it doesn't do is it really is about residential development. So it's not meant to protect commercial development or retail, office, and different uses like that.
On that subject, can it protect against commercial encroachment into residential.
Not necessarily, the overlay doesn't do that. Your base district does that. So if you have a residential district, one of the N1A through E, that already prohibits commercial development, except for very limited things like work from home types of opportunities,
How do we
home
find out
businesses.
what our base is?
The best way, and can I talk a little bit about that at the end? And the best way to do it is look on, I'll just tell you now. Go to Charlotte Explorer, just Google Charlotte Explorer. It's an online mapping tool. You pull that up, you can type in your address, and then off to the right-hand side is a ton of layered information. If you go down to zoning and click that layer button, it'll pop up a map of the entire city, and it'll show you that particular item.
Can you
So-
just tell us what Medford Acres is since we're here?
Try to look it up.
Yeah. I'm gonna guess N1A or B.
That would be helpful.
I'm gonna guess N1A. Yeah, most neighborhoods like yours are almost all
Send one in.
N1A. Okay. N1A is the least dense and primarily single family. Now that in the new UDO, that's single family duplexes, triplexes, but it's primarily the lowest intensity of residential. So N1A is lowest intensity. N1E would be highest intensity of just residential. That might be townhomes, things like that. So in the whole toolbox of elements that the city has to protect character, there are more or less, right? I'll start on the most protection are restrictive covenants. And I think I understand, we haven't seen them, but I understand that Medford Acres may have restrictive covenants, right?
Yeah, we do.
You do, right? And that's an agreement between private parties, right? So as properties are bought and sold between two private entities, those are passed down with a deed. The city can't really influence how those are used or not used, right? That's a completely kind of private matter. So that's the kind of highest. It is deed restricted. The next highest is a local historic district, and that's where architectural standards come in. All sorts of elements that are guided by the Historic Districts Commission and staff. One here and others. There's a new overlay district called Street Side Historic District, which gets into architectural style and such a little bit more. And then there's the neighborhood character overlay district on that. So it's kind of in that middle zone of protection where you are allowed to start to define lot width, height, setback, parking, building coverage, tree standards, and such. And then there's a second one, which we're not talking about tonight, which is the residential infill overlay. And then you just have your base development standards in whatever zoning district you're in. So your base development standards in N1A. So that's the whole from the least protection about character to the most protection is kind of in this range here. So we're falling in that element. So the neighborhood character overlay district, we know one of the reasons that we created this tool was to really start to allow neighborhoods to control the character of new development in a neighborhood, where we've all seen things that are just out of place, too tall, too close to the street, don't look anything like the character of the neighborhoods, have garages that may come right off the front instead of off to the side, those types of things, driveways that take up the whole front yard, you name it. There's a lot of different things. This is one of the tools that we created to do that. As I mentioned, it's only applicable to the residential districts, and that's where it's that N1A through N1C zoning districts. So you're in N1A, and what it can't do is modify any of the restrictive covenants that you have in your that are currently on a particular property. It can repeat them, but it can't change them. So if you're a restricted covenant, say you have a height of 20 feet, we can't come in and suggest that the neighborhood conservation overlay say 18 feet or 22 feet. It can equal 20. So it gives you the ability to shine a light on a covenant that sometimes those are overlooked by sales and everything like that. So it will take what you already have on the books and put them in a really accessible place, like a zoning ordinance that then has city folks, as you go through permitting, looking at that, which they don't necessarily look at restricted covenants. I know I've said I wasn't going to take questions.
Yeah, so I'm a recent buyer in the neighborhood and I was never given covenants.
Yeah.
Would the NPO still be able to apply to those? There was no covenants given.
Yeah, so there, and I won't get into the case law on this. There is case law that would change that particular element. I don't think it's actually passed through the Supreme Court, but it would say that if covenants aren't enforced for X number of years or aren't passed down, then they're kind of null and void. But that's not the case right now. So regardless of whether you were given them, they still exist. And if you do the deed research, you can probably find them in there. So that's why we look at repeating those standards that are in there. Standards that aren't in the restrictive covenants, we can suggest new elements of that, but we can't change them.
So that would give us an opportunity to sort of codify.
Yep.
Existing,
Exactly.
these covenants that we all sort of know about, but they're sort of fuzzy.
Exactly.
I think it's an opportunity to
Yep.
take those and get some city backup
Mhm.
to enforce.
Yes, exactly. And so this covers all new construction, additions, changes, expansions, alterations to any of the dwelling types that you have on your particular property. So the reason why we look at neighborhood character from the entirety of your neighborhood is to make sure that there's a consistency in the features, right? So we try to find, and what you'll see is we've just taken averages of what you all have as physical characteristics in your neighborhood. The lot width, the building height, the relationship of your primary home, and if you have a detached garage or a shed or anything else, the relationship of that coverage to your entire lot. So it helps with that. It may have similar kind of characteristics of your streetscape, right? So, and this doesn't guide any of the trees that are in the public right of way. There are other ordinances that do that. But if you, for instance, in a lot of neighborhoods have significant canopy coverage that might be in your front yard, right? And that's an important character defining feature. You can decide to regulate that in an NCO that says that has to be maintained. A tree has to be replaced when it's removed in the general location of the front yard. So you start to see that pattern of tree cover remain that way. And they has to be the way that that a new home or an addition or anything else would be arranged on the site would be similar. So if your garages are all in the back or off to the side and your driveways are off to the side and they're of a certain square footage, you couldn't just change that pattern. So you would say, okay, all the driveways have to be on the left or to the side of a particular home. They can't come to the front. So there's some analysis with that as well. So I won't dig into this. I'll leave that for questions to the city staff on this, but you have to meet, there are standards for this. We try to make sure that a neighborhood is at least 15 contiguous acres. So you're not going to picking and choosing small pieces of a larger neighborhood. There has to be elements. We don't want missing teeth along the street, right? So it has to include the entire block of frontage, right? So that consistency and character is defined by home after home, right? And not home after home 3 down or home 4 over. And there has to be the 75% of the lots have to be already developed, right? So that gives us, you can't protect something where the character isn't necessarily already set, right? So that idea of saying you have a built neighborhood, it has characteristics, we're going to define those characteristics from the number of homes that are there already. So out of the options that you all have to protect with the overlay is a minimum or maximum lot width. We sometimes call that the frontage, right? So the width of your property at the street, where the street right of way is, that's one way. The minimum or maximum setbacks. In many cases, a minimum setback in a zoning might be much, much closer than you think, but but people decided over the years, or when this neighborhood was built, maybe everyone just decided, or the original builder built everything back further than it actually was. So you can't rely necessarily on base zoning district. Building coverage, as I mentioned, that's the square footage of your home, and any accessory structures that you have. Could be garage, could be apartment, could be, an accessory dwelling unit, could be a shed. We take that square footage, we compare it to as a percentage to the overall lot area that you have. That gives you kind of maximum building coverage. Surface parking, and it's the location and the square footage. So you try to keep that. If all your driveways, for instance, are 1 lane, and you don't want people just to pave their entire lot with 2 or 3 lanes of everything, that and they're off to the side, or sometimes they're off to the front side or something like that. You can define those types of characteristics. And then as I mentioned, tree planting is everything kind of really in that kind of front yard area outside of the right of way, but still on private property. So those are the types of things that you can choose to actually choose to regulate with that. It's about an 8 to 12 month process. You're quarter of the way through with this first meeting. A big portion of making it this far is making sure that you have the amount of people interested and signed up to be able to do this. What we're doing now, introducing all the elements, letting you see for the first time some of the analysis that we've done, so you can understand for yourselves what those numbers are, what those averages are. We go then into a phase where we'll start to develop the plan, which means we'll pick the layers that you want to regulate, and we'll pick a number, say us are going to do that. And then we'll come back, Scott will write that up. That will become a plan that comes before you in this public meeting. Number 2, then it becomes just like any other rezoning. It's a rezoning petition that goes in front of Planning Commission and Council votes on that. It's generally about 8 to 12 months. It can go probably a little bit quicker, depending on how quickly you all decide on what numbers to use. And as always, making sure you lobby your city council. I won't really go into this because it's probably really hard to read otherwise. It's kind of just saying if you look at the green, historic districts and historic street side districts regulate the most. A residential infill overlay regulates the least. They have different functions. Your character overlay district regulates a good number of the elements that really define the character of your neighborhood. So be a great tool. It doesn't go through a commission review. How it's enforced is through permit review, which, as you mentioned earlier, if it's a restricted covenant, oftentimes gets overlooked or not looked at all. So it has that. Okay. And what I'm going to have Anna do now is talk a little bit about the process and how we developed and what analysis and the data we used to develop these standards, and then quickly kind of go through them, and then we'll have some time at the end to kind of, we can even do like a little dot exercise where you take a look at each of these maps and then give us a kind of yes or no. Yes, I like this, or no, I don't like this. Not really the vote for it, but thank you. So I want to turn it over to Anna, who did a lot of the analysis for this, and then I'll forward it if you like.
Sure, sure. Yeah, so I'll kind of be going over the averages we found and the methodology for finding them. But first of all, this is kind of overview of the numbers we found. For the building coverage, we found that 15% is about the average of your building's footprint to the size of each individual lot.
And remember to speak up too,
Right.
because I had that same problem.
Sorry, couldn't quite, but we also have found that there's a 97-foot average for frontage width, and that is just the width of your lots from kind of the right of way. We also found that for surface parking, you guys average about 1,158 square feet of area for all of your driveways and kind of parking on all of your lots. We also found that they are kind of adjacent to the side of your buildings. For the setback distance, this is kind of your building or your house distance from your property line or the right of way. And this distance averaged to be about 45 feet. The building heights that you guys have in your neighborhood average to be about 18 feet, and this is for your principal structures, so probably your houses. And then for tree locations, we also looked at how many trees are in the first 50 feet from the road center lines, and we found there to be about 131 trees. So I'll be kind of going over the maps that we have for all of these. So back to building coverage, to find most of the data for all of this, we use like publicly available data and use that with a tool called ArcGIS to formulate these maps, which also helped us calculate a lot of the different averages that we found. So if you look on the maps and up here, you can kind of see that every single lot we have calculated about the building coverage percentage. And then with each of the blocks, we calculated an average just to like take away kind of outliers that might be skewing the data. And then we came up with an overall percentage. So that's how we got the 15% building coverage average for this one. For building height, very similar method using LiDAR data, we were able to find
Can
points.
you explain what LiDAR data is?
Yeah. So LiDAR data is kind of like using satellite data, I believe, to kind of pinpoint a spot, like the kind of the topography, but also structures and trees and other things on the ground. And it will pinpoint a spot or all the spots in your neighborhood. So it'll like give you the height that a point may be, and then a point on the ground. So if it pinpoints a spot like on top of the building and then on the ground, we can then like take that distance or difference and come up with a height. So that's how we found the heights of all the different principal and accessory buildings in your neighborhood. And that's how we kind of found the average to be about 18 feet.
Can you explain what ADU is, because I don't understand that term.
That's an accessory unit. So sometimes it's a shed, sometimes it's a garage, might be an extra dwelling unit or something. So it's usually a smaller structure on your property somehow.
Yeah.
The other thing to mention is that the height in all cases is taken by the same way that our ordinance measures that, which is from the peak of your roof So if you have, if you have whatever the tallest peak of that roof is, that's what that is. That way.
This next one is frontage width. This is kind of where taking the average of sort of the middle of these blocks really comes into play, because some of these blocks, especially like corner or lots, especially corner lots, will like skew the data a lot because they are just a lot larger. So we're really just trying to find like the most average that your neighborhood has, so that you can kind of see where your standard might or should lie. So that's how we came up with around 100 feet is the average for your frontage lit widths for each of your lots.
And can I add a couple things to that? So a corner lot obviously has two frontages. So we kind of take that out as an average, right? Because you don't want to count one property twice. If you've got a lot of curvy roads and there's sometimes some curves, sometimes those curves can really create really narrow lots. So we try to make sure that we're looking at the data in different ways. So we take out the outliers, right? The really wide things or the really narrow things to make sure that it gets to about what the average neighborhood lot is. That's kind of how we do that.
All right, and then setback distance, this is again was calculated using GIS, just taking the distance from your property line to the front of your building, and then again averaging all of those out and coming up with the most standard we could find, taking out some of the outliers that might have a really far or short setback. And so that's how we came up with 45 feet. Surface parking, this was done with an aerial satellite imagery, really drawing out where these driveways really are and then calculating their areas of the polygons to come up with the square footage of each parking lot or driveway, and then averaging all those out. So as you can also see on the map, most of the driveways, as I was kind of saying before, look to be coming sort of from the side of your houses. And then lastly, this is our tree location analysis. Every tree that's blue and kind of in this gray buffer is within the 50-foot buffer from the street center lines. We were really just kind of trying to find patterns to see like how many trees and if they are in any sort of way repetitious with other adjacent lots to form a tree pattern. And we kind of looked around to see if there were any ornamental trees that were over 50 feet, or trees that are showing up in the data that might not actually be there anymore. So this analysis can kind of help us determine what kind of tree pattern you may want to see in your neighborhood. Yeah. So
this is really just if you take a look at difference of what by right construction would be in your N1A district. So empty lot, someone tears down a lot, you don't have an NCO. Your coverage can be 40 to 50% of the lot. Your building height to the peak could be 48 feet, front setback of 27, and a lot width of 70. Right. So if we take a look at, if you decided to use just the averages that Anna just presented, you see the difference, right? Whether it's 17, 18, 20, we have to kind of look at the covenant to see what your height limitation is there. 15% for lot coverage, parking on the side, nearly 100 feet in lot width, and a 45-foot setback. So if you just kind of see the difference, you see the effect that an NCO would have on new development or someone adding an addition to their home and such. So essentially, this is the picture that you'll be creating for any future changes to your neighborhood based on the standards that we choose that get codified in the NCO district. You could even start with that one and then go from there. The next steps in this is we need to finalize the standards. This is the first step of first time you've seen those. We need to start to craft the regulatory language. So this will be, there's one other neighborhood that's doing this now. So we're doing this with this together for the first time. And then, we'll have that final meeting. It will remember to continue to get signatures. And it'll go through that, once it starts to enter that public process, your advocacy with your council members is always important with that as well. So with that, we can turn the lights back on and we can take questions.
Easy question.
Yeah.
Is there some sort of elective process within our neighborhood, or is it strictly council people voting?
Your elective process is making sure you meet the minimum standards of percentage of people that have to sign into the council ultimately makes the decision.
We're not going to set up an election.
So this is not, because since the, it's basically no more single family homes. So you're not saying we still could be zoned where a duplex, triplex, whatever could come in.
Yeah.
It's just to prevent them, because I also heard, because we are on a corner lot.
Yeah.
And I heard that's where they want to put them now. But you would still have to stay if this passes within that, so you couldn't just slap something, take down every tree on the lot and have a bunch of you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so your duplex or triplex or whatever would have to fit in that box,
Okay,
right? Not this box. And we all see what those are. They're all 3 stories. They're all max out the standards. The driveways are in the front. That's partly why we're trying to change that.
For these neighborhood care driveways, this is obviously, like you said, new to Charlotte right now.
Yeah.
Was there a blueprint from another city this was taken from that you guys saw results driven, and where was that?
Sure.
What was some of that?
One of the local ones that I can say in North Carolina, Raleigh has had this for years and has done that. It has done it quite well. I don't remember the other.
There's Chapel Hill.
Chapel Hill. That's right. Green. Yeah.
Raleigh.
Do we see in those areas any correlation to increase in property values in time compared to rest of comp markets? Does this throttle in any way growth of property value because larger building isn't allowed, or because this has more stringent than regulation in on the neighborhood?
Sure. I'll answer that in non-committal ways. That research hasn't necessarily been done, but if you take a historic district, for example, that in a historic district has, like I said, the most stringent kind of architectural guidelines and character guidelines that hasn't kind of throttled value or anything else like that. So, but I can't say that anyone's ever really taken.
Sure.
That
Historic
particular-
district's not quite apples to apples.
No,
So
but
the
it-
value of-
Yeah.
The one in Chapel Hill, they did a study, and along with, they had some other things policy they were doing too, but the one they had in Chapel Hill reduced displacement along with, it wasn't just the overlay, but that was some other things they were doing, like land banking and stuff like that. It would reduce displacement in that overlay district.
I'll go here and then there.
I'm rather dense, but just bear with me for a minute. If I understand this correctly, our covenants that we have established in this neighborhood can serve as the base. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then we can get one overlay.
It has to equal your covenants. It can't change your covenants. So for instance, I can't remember, I think in this neighborhood, lot width, setbacks, and maximum height are in there. So those numbers that we all decide on,
Feet.
So
in terms of stories. So the maximum height is 2 stories, or 4.5 stories. And so,
that'll be
there
interesting.
is no,
No foot, there's no foot or anything. Okay. So that's a great question that we're gonna have to get attorneys to figure out. Because the way our ordinance measures height is in feet.
Right.
So what happens whenever we say 18 feet is 2 stories?
Does the covenant need to be part of the deed attachment? I think there's question about the enforceability of covenants.
Sure.
They have been enforced some places, they haven't other places.
Yeah.
So obviously this is gonna help support those covenants.
Correct.
Were written in 19.
Yeah. So it essentially by shining a light on them, they put them into the zone ordinance and codify them, at least they're out in the open and enforceable by the city, which is not what happens now. So.
Sorry, I was late. I didn't look at this one, but maybe I missed this. Like you were talking, like next steps, this, that, and the other thing, but did I miss, like, is this being forced on us or are we voting for this? Because, I mean, like, signing directions for driveways and things like that, doesn't seem that valuable to me. This is much for itself.
Sure.
I don't really understand the benefits other than, like, that slide there, like, okay, I get that, like.
Yeah.
What if I don't want to do this at all?
So you all have to decide what standards you want to regulate out of the ones that are available. And 2, you all chose to do this and invited us here to talk
Let me
about it.
clarify that 25% of the neighborhood
Sorry.
chose to do that because we had about 24 hours, they get 25% of the neighborhood. For it to go into effect, to be able to go through the rezoning process, we have to have 51%.
Yeah, yes.
So we have to have
Yep.
46. So that is a step before it gets passed. This is collaborative, so we're trying to figure out what works for everyone, but it isn't.
And that's homeowners. Yeah.
Property owner.
Property owners.
Property owners.
Yeah.
To answer your question, like you said, we have options here. We choose the option we want to vote on, so it's completely optional to us.
You don't want to regulate driveway width, you can strike that from the list and that's not in the NC.
I just want to make sure I do, what this is something that the city's doing, or is this something that people voted for?
Yeah.
So,
We invited the city to come here and present this to us.
For anyone else that has questions, can you speak up? The Zoom isn't catching it, so your neighbors on Zoom can't hear your questions, so they can't hear your responses.
And I'll try to repeat those with my soft voice, but next to the actual mic.
I was just gonna read out a question from the chat. Can someone explain the slide in very basic terms? I don't know what it shows. I think it shows limitations on how big the new homes can be. But what is by right construction?
Construction.
I just don't understand the two drawings.
Got it. So every zoning district in the city has development standards. How high, how tall something can be, how much coverage it can have on a lot, what the front setbacks are, side setbacks, rear setbacks. So the N1A district has a set of standards, of which height is 48 feet. So someone without an overlay district tomorrow on an empty lot or one that you want to tear down could bulldoze existing home, build a new home that's 48 feet tall. It could cover 40 to 50% of the lot. And be as close to the street as 27 feet. And that lot must be even narrower than what you have, that average. The other, the option of the construction with the neighborhood conservation overlay district is showing if we just took all the averages that we talked about, it reduces the size of everything essentially. That kind of makes sense. So the new standards that someone has to build to is on the right side of the screen. The base standards are on without the NCO are on the left side of the screen.
On this, I would assume as long as they fit all the requirements, this was brought at one time where basically we're selling 2 lots to split it into 3 lots and build 3 different homes instead of.
It would be,
Yeah.
but those lots would have to be 97 feet.
So,
long.
yeah, so if, you know, somehow they got one that was 200 and one that was 100, then they can do it and have
Yes,
100.
correct.
Okay.
Does this, the standard here that we're talking about of these averages, like you said, that has to reinforce the covenants, it cannot change those covenants?
Correct. Yeah.
For the things that are not explicitly like delineated in the covenant, does that have to go by the average currently in the neighborhood, or can we inflate that
You can
another
change it.
20% if we wanted to?
Yeah, you can change, you could go lower or higher, you can pick the average.
Okay.
That's partly the decisions that you all have to make. We just give you the data to make those decisions.
So for example, we could do it so that we can allow people to expand their houses, yards, put on an addition, as long as it doesn't meet whatever we decide, as long as it doesn't exceed 30%.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah, you could choose any number different than that number.
Or you can
Right.
go up a story and a half. to consider.
Yeah, you could say instead of 17 or 18 feet, you could say 20 feet or whatever, but
Yeah,
that-
you just can't go to, you just can't, you can adjust them a little bit, but like from all this, the great work that, Grant and his team has done, you can't go like too far. Like if the study said like 17 feet, you can't say 25. Because since it is a conserving neighborhood, it has to apply to what's existing, so you can't do any numbers is what you want, it has to be, of what already exists, if that makes sense.
If the, let's say that, you know, there's mistakes on these averages, like I see my, I know some things on here are wrong.
Yeah.
And it would change the averages if all these numbers were correct for every house in the neighborhood. And then like right now, it's not.
not by much.
It wouldn't change if I'm.
No, it's like, we run our averages a couple different ways. Like we run it just as a straight average, every lot, everything. I'll just use frontage as an example. We're running an average of the frontage of your lots. And the first pass, we won't take out the corner lots. Okay, what's that equal? Okay, the second pass, we take out the corner lots. Third pass, we might take out the small, weird pie-shaped things that are on a corner. All of those come within a foot or so. These aren't big extremes. But now there are neighborhoods that have some wildly different lot sizes, some really big homes that may sit. Last week there was a home that was 300 feet off the property. Only one. It sat on 3 old lots and it was just big and sat off to the back. So we can't use that as indicative of the character of the neighborhood because it's only one of the houses in the neighborhood. So we tried to use our kind of professional knowledge to say, what is it that we're trying to get to in terms of what the overall character of a street is. And then we took, as Anna said, then we would look at it as a block face by block face. So from corner to corner, how does that compare as an average to the other averages that we had? So we use a lot of different methods to get there because we're not out there with a surveyor and a stake and doing on your property, doing that level of detail. We can only use the high resolution, mind you, LiDAR data and the aerial data that we have, which is really close. So.
Okay, my other question is,
Yep.
Let's say there's a house that already has an existing 2 stories. They don't have to tear down their second story.
No, it's only for new construction.
Okay.
No retroactive.
Okay.
Yep.
Grandfather down.
Yeah, your grandfather could soon.
Yep.
And you're also looking at, 72-year-old neighborhood, every single house is added on to differently.
Yeah.
Every lot is a different shape.
Yep.
And nobody has only 17, everybody has something averages. What the covenants and probably most of us want to make sure is that we can't subdivide these lots into 45-foot strips.
Yep.
And putting the housing as dense as other places.
Yeah. So the question was, repeating for folks and talking directly at a microphone right now, is that if someone's home is already 2 stories and the new height is less than that or less than what that existing height, would they have to to tear it down? The answer is no. This is for new things, not existing. So
Okay, I've got a few things from the chat. The first one, since our covenants say 1.5 story limit, does that mean the NCO means no 2-story homes can be built?
that means that we will have to define a height for 1.5 stories. And I don't know how the attorneys are gonna rule on that yet, so. But the answer is, yeah, there wouldn't be, like, if the height, for instance, if they say 1.5 stories is reasonably 18 feet, because that's what your average is. Then if you can squeeze 2 stories in 18 feet, then technically you could build a 2-story home. Now your covenant's gonna stop that from happening. That's the weird thing about 1/2 stories. They're very hard to kind of define that way. This at least gives a foot. So whether it's 2 stories or 1.5 stories, it's gonna look pretty similar to all the other, your neighbors' houses and your existing houses. That's the whole point. Look pretty similar to what's out there now, not something that's out of scale that way. Yep.
Second question, sorry, I'll be quick. Is there a provision to grant exceptions on an individual basis? For instance, a vote by homeowners or the city?
No.
Okay, awesome.
Did I say that loud enough? No. Now, someone could choose to go through a variance process with the Board of Adjustment, but that's not, it wouldn't be considered a hard, I'm not an attorney. That doesn't seem like a hardship to me, so. But those options are out there.
Right, and then the last question is from Anonymous. Can we vote to not change anything? This sounds like you're limiting my ability to build what I want with my property as long as it conforms to this zoning requirement. If I wanted to live in an HOA neighborhood, I would.
You all can vote on that. That's your signatures right there. So,
I do like.
and can I grab
yeah,
them
yeah.
first and then?
Yeah, clarification, that, so we can't change what the average is. We couldn't say we can allow the stories or the height of the house to be 35 feet.
Correct.
You have to stay with this average, right? So
No, well, within a range of the average, I would say.
Oh, so
There's a little bit of leeway, but to Justin's point, if the character of your neighborhood is 1.5 stories and the majority of the homes are 18 feet in height, and you decide to like, nah, we think the character of our neighborhood is really 35 feet, which is not found in the neighborhood at all, then that's not the purpose of
we
that.
can do like 20 feet or something like that.
Yeah, I think there's and I don't know what the range is, but there's probably a couple feet in either direction there that gives you some.
Same with the percentages. Lot covered by.
Sure.
You can bump that to 20%.
I mean, to me, that seems reasonable. This is all new ground to all of us, so like that's a discussion that we're gonna. Yeah, that too, right? Yep. Yeah, I mean, all these are any one of these numbers, right? This, the parking percentage, the height, the setback, tree location. Those are all up to you to decide what you want to include in this overlay district.
This is not an HOA. I think that's
Nope.
some confusion with some folks, that this is, an HOA. And it's not, it's just trying to keep the characteristics of the neighborhood. And I don't know how many of you were born and raised in Charlotte, but I was. And I lived about 3 minutes from here. My mother's told me stories about when this neighborhood was built. And it's very interesting because she can tell you the houses where she's in her 90s, so she can tell you where the architect did this house and architect did that house, and Arthur Smith lived there. So I, take great pride in this neighborhood, and I would like to see, this adopted.
But the great thing is you have a great talk coming up on that.
That's kind of, just piggybacking on that, to make sure there's no confusion. My understanding of this was mainly too, because the city's made changes about, we have no more single family zoning. It's like those neighborhoods who are interested in why we moved to this neighborhood, in my opinion, to keep character, whether it be the house, the size of the lot, because you can't find these lot sizes anywhere anymore. And, you have tree canopy and things like that, that we just want to say, I don't look at it as people doing additions and such, more as if someone sells their home and they're like, let's tear it down and slap up this giant monstrosity that doesn't fit in. I mean, that's kind of the way I look at it, other than prohibiting people who live here, then you know, doing add-ons and such. I mean, that kind of, this is just, came out, so we could try to keep the neighborhood the way.
Yeah.
I mean, not that I give
Roughly.
it's change, but if a duplex comes in, I'm okay with that. It's just, yes, don't want to see something that totally doesn't fit in, that is all concrete in the front, and no tree on the lot. And
Yeah.
It just doesn't blend.
Yeah.
Okay.
This can't impact the architectural style, but it does, but it impacts the flow. Like basically the size.
Right, yeah, it could look different. It just,
I'll ask a question, I'll quit bothering.
The list as many as possible.
The last thing I want to ask is, you know, we have compared this somewhat to some regulation with historical districts. It does sound a little similar, different, but a lot of times those neighborhoods are getting a benefit from the city in some sort of tax break, kickback, when they go to upfit things to keep those things in stock. Is there any sort of monetary benefit for our neighborhood that the city subsidizes anything from us doing this?
Rehab tax credits are for national register districts, not local ones.
Okay.
So something like Myers Park is national register. We don't have any regulatory control. That has nothing to do with their zoning. So that's like a federal tax credit benefit that they're eligible for. But if you're just one of those HDOs Grant was showing the chart, that doesn't have any financial.
Yeah, the city doesn't have a tax,
You don't have
its
a-
own, it's federal tax.
Yeah.
I'll start back there.
Would this prohibit us from like combining lots? So if I want to buy my neighbor's lot and build a house that is still 15% of the combined two lots, would that?
As long as your two lots are more than whatever number you all choose to that minimum lot width. So, and your percentages still work out that way.
First, talk a couple more things from the chat. Sorry. First thing is just a comment. We've been told by lawyers in the past that our current covenants aren't really enforceable because we haven't enforced them in quite a while. An example is somebody sold their house to a business who turned the house into a doctor's office. Just a comment to keep in mind. Another question. So can we kind of a la carte what characteristics are included? But what is a lot of the allowable range from average for minimum maximum measurements as deviation from average?
I don't know the answer for the deviation between that, but it probably can't be much more than 5 feet in any direction, but
Yeah. I'm not exactly sure what it is either. We haven't already discussed it, but definitely a couple of feet, maybe 5. We'd have to go and see. So I don't have a number, but yeah, it's definitely not a lot.
Can I make a comment to the?
Yes, there's an a la carte aspect to this. You'll choose out of the 6 different elements, one of those 6 you want to regulate.
To the point that you brought up from the chat, that the house had been sold, the house that was residential was sold and turned into a business. That was possible because the zoning for the buildings along Eastway had changed. It wasn't the zoning at Medford Acres, it was a city decision to change the zoning for the properties that backed onto or were adjacent to the street. So that's a slightly different situation. That's not like what happened to the other houses because the zoning is not changing.
And I had one more thing from the chat. We, as a neighborhood, have tried to fight for speed bumps a bunch of times. Is there any way that we can help the speed bump situation?
Nice try. But there is a traffic calming program that the city has. I only because Scott used to work for it.
We've tried it.
Oh, really? Okay. Sorry.
I know it can take a long time. One Heights, it took them 10 years and they just got them installed recently.
Wow.
So they said it was a very persistent storm.
One thing, the issue about the doctor's office was they sold a partial of their land was the issue. That's what broke the covenant, not the rezoning. Okay. Other factors, the trees are the only thing I don't quite understand where you're saying like there's 131 trees in that area. How does that equal? Because I understand percentage of house lot. Does it equal if you have a tree or you have 20 trees, you have to keep all 20 trees, or how does that
Yeah, I mean,
equate?
I think we'll have to, I say we collectively will have to decide what that is. We try, like, the way we looked at it was, is there a significant planting of trees of a certain size or greater that add to the character of the site that aren't in the public right of way and controlled by other ordinances and protected by other ordinances? So, or is there, like, you could have a neighborhood that has a cherry tree in every yard.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? And that becomes something that's, beautiful in the spring and you want to keep that. So you could decide, we want to make sure that any future lot always has cherry trees in the front yard. Or if you don't have street trees, we want to make sure that your street trees are on private property, right? We want to make sure that those trees are there in the future. If someone decides to come in, bulldoze,
Yeah.
take out that tree but they would have to replace it.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
that's my only thing is that, one, I'm all for the trees. It's just more of, I know because like I said, everything else is very easy to size out, but the trees is
It's a
where
tricky
it's
one,
throwing
yeah.
me of whether
It's not
it's
like a
saying,
percent
because,
per
you
lot.
know,
No, yeah, and it could
I was
be
counting out
it could be one per lot, it could be, one per lot, the tree has to be able to grow to be taller than, I don't know, 50 feet or whatever it is. So you have, you're not just getting a dinky little dogwood, whenever you just took out a big oak. Like that tree has to be replaced by something that would be comparable. We think.
And it can't be less than the current tree safe standards. So like if you choose, like, you don't even have to have it, but if you choose, you want to have the tree on there, it can't contradict the UDO. So like, it can't be less than the tree coverage requirements for the city. It's really insane.
Can we signing these maps tonight as to what we think is important?
I think it would be, if we have the time and everyone wants to, we certainly don't have to, we can send out all this information. And you all can talk about it in groups and such. If you want to do a little dot exercise and just kind of, that way it gives us a sense of like where people are landing. Yes, I want to do this. No, I don't want to do that. We can certainly do that at the end as you kind of going out, give you some dots. It doesn't mean, it's not gonna be a binding decision or anything like that, just gives us a sense.
What makes something binding? When do we actually make something?
So you all discuss the standards that you want with this team of city folks, and you'll say, we want to regulate these 3 things, these 5 things, these 6 things. Here's the number that we want to use. That will get drafted up into the document that you all will then have a second meeting and say, yes, this is what we told you that we wanted our standards. That will get submitted as a zoning exhibit, and then we'll go through the standard that way.
Does each
So-
individual choice have to have 51%, 51, 51, 51?
No, it's all.
The overall.
Okay, okay.
So that's good. Then you can get an idea of what all the neighbors
Yeah.
want.
So at this point, we need to, as a neighborhood, have discussion among ourselves before we present something to the city.
Yep.
So we need to find a way to summarize what we've heard tonight and present it to the property owners in the neighborhood and find a way to, almost like a survey, what would you like? What would you like? Kind of put it together, and then get everybody together and say, hey, it sounds like this is what we're all, our consensus. And then see if it is, get a consensus and then present back to y'all. Is that what I'm getting?
Yeah. Now, who is
Is that in the meeting or is that email or how are we presenting that?
I assume just email back. I don't know who you're like your.
Yeah, I think,
Might have been, and as you should email in the overlays box, so we have a communication thread going, so whoever your representatives are, and the applicant, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike and Tariq, you filled out the application for us?
Yeah, I guess I'm discussing, I'm not, maybe we're not reading about it tonight, and you all. come back. I mean. That's
I
the role of the facilitator. I don't think anyone needs to do it.
Well, I mean, partly that's why we gave you averages, right? the neighborhood last week said, yep, we like the averages. Like now, whether they stick with that, who knows, right? This time, they had time to think of it, but you all may decide to go to 20 feet or whatever that is.
people right now, like 13 units and some 20.
Tonight, I mean, I would just go, the first thing is kind of getting to what do we want to, what's the sense of the folks that have shown up here? What do you want to regulate out of these layers? Yes or no? That's one step. Why why bother talking about trees if no one wants to regulate trees? Like, let's take that off the list and we can focus on the other things. So that to me is the easiest. Like, I think, I don't know if we have sticky notes, but we could easily kind of, have some, if people have ideas, we could post some sticky notes on like, yeah, it needs to be 15% or 20% or 18%. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we
we're
can-
also gonna have a recording of the Zoom call sent out.
And the maps and.
Regarding the tree question, I read this right, the tree question really involves the front setback, correct?
Yeah.
The amount of trees within that setback?
Yeah.
So the rest
Or
of
the
the
size.
property is not for regulation.
Correct.
Just clarifying that.
Yeah.
And then I think we all need to take a step back and just kind of understand why we called it to begin with. I mean, I think there could be a lot of individual voting, like which person you want, but there's a reason we call it as a neighborhood, so there's one protect. And personally for me was, you can't prevent it, but preventing triplex and duplex as much as possible. So the way I view this personally is just minimal regulation, prevent triplex and duplex. But that's personally how I view it, but maybe we just take a step back and talk about that as a group. What's really the point that we all want to see accomplished?
That won't prevent triplex and duplex. It'll
But-
prevent the size of them being out of scale to what the rest of the neighborhood is.
It also strengthens like building area.
Yep.
I don't, I'm one of those people that I think there's not enough people to be able to afford housing and stuff like that. So I just want to say that I'm for, doing this kind of stuff, but pushing people out of the triplex, I'm not into it.
Yeah.
But it
And I
won't
can't,
make it any more affordable. The developer's gonna put it in and then just they're gonna charge rent, so it won't be any better.
It's a question, if they had examples, like how the process would work, like, okay, we agree to stuff, how does it get enforced? Or like, let's say you do want to do something, you have to then get like somebody from the city out to approve your blueprints or something, or like, how does that work?
so on single family lots, you have to get a building permit to do things, right? And that building permit is a zoning review. Yeah, that building permit is a zoning, in that building permit is a zoning review. If it triggers, like you can do small decks and things like that under a certain percentage. That building permit with the county triggers a zoning review with the city that looks at these standards. And they look at what you've submitted and go, yes, no, whatever. That, and then it goes back into a revision cycle that way. The breakdown now is that cities and county doesn't look at restrictive covenants and deed restrictions. So it can easily be missed, forgotten, not given, whatever that is. So.
Question from the chat, how does this impact the neighborhood's ability to qualify for sidewalks?
It does not.
What was that?
It does not.
Okay.
Yeah. Because the sidewalks are in the right of way and we're not regulating anything within the right of way.
One of the pieces in our covenants is how close fences can be built to the street. When we built the fence between us and the rent house next to us, we did go to the covenants and it said that you had the street end of the fence had to be back so far. So we were very careful to that. We've had a couple of neighbors who moved in and were new and built front yard fences that go right up to and sometimes over the right of way. Is that something that we can also include in this?
Not in the NCO, but they certainly can't build anything in the right of way without an encroachment agreement. So, that's just an enforcement issue, right? You see it happen, you call city enforcement, they come out and go, no, you can't do that. That's with any standard right now, frankly.
But things like fences are not part of the NCO.
Even if it's in the covenant.
Nope, remains in the covenant, right? And it has
It's
to be,
made with a covenant,
Yep.
but it can't be.
it won't be,
carried
it's not a
over.
layer that can be added to this. Now, historic district, sure, yeah, fences are very much something that's regulated in historic district.
How do you have to be a historic district?
50 years is the average for the bulk of the
So we
property.
could.
I will say the historic districts do regulate both the buildings and the site, so things like fences, driveways, parkings, materials, heights, HVAC location, pools, decks, pretty much anything on the exterior of your property falls under that review.
Also, if we did the
Much
NCO
more.
and then later decided we'd like to, instead of having an NCO, have a historical layer, does that preempt us from changing?
You would have to remove the NCO and apply the historic district.
For our grandchildren.
That's what it's like. Yeah. That's what I say. You couldn't have both and you wouldn't.
I think you have both.
You wouldn't.
You'd have to relinquish one.
Yeah.
You'd have to give Darvon to all the developers for the 6 months waiting.
Not a question. I just want to say it's 7:15. I don't know if we want to wrap up questions and do the dot exercise. And if you guys have an email address that you can share where folks can send questions after they go home and marinate on this a little bit.
Is that a?
Overlays at charlottenc.gov.
Thank you.
You are welcome.
NC.
At charlottenc.gov. Overlays with an X.
Atisha, I cut it off. Sorry, y'all.
Okay, do you want to take the emails though? Like everyone come to you and then you forward like one email, you know?
No, my semester starts next week. That's not happening. Y'all can email them directly, and if you want, you can CC the Medford Acres inbox. Also, real quick, please make sure you signed in, and if you're not currently getting neighborhood emails and you want to be on the email list for things like this and for the replay video, come to me and I can get you guys on there.
So I want to say thank you so much to everyone coming out this evening. Thank you to the city for staying here. We will see you next Wednesday, right here. We will have food. We're getting trays of food from Lashish Kebab. Good chicken and chicken food. Bring something to share.
There's also over here on the border, and I guess to go, as an example. There's like a little.
We got started.
You guys are in the city, right?
Yeah.
This month, we did our project in Charlotte Water.
Yes, the new,
Yeah, so May 19th, if you have a city badge, you can bring as many friends and families you want. We're doing exclusive tasting for your city badge, so. Yeah, so that 19th, it's a Sunday afternoon, come out to us.
very cool.
Yeah, cool. Thank y'all for being here today.
No, thank you for asking my question.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, no, yeah, I can ping the lawyers, but I haven't heard anything, you haven't heard anything back from them.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people that want those little mill houses, they ripped off the
roof and built a second story. And those houses are worth a lot of money now because of the location. This would stop that from happening in Medford Acres. Not that I plan on doing that.
Yeah.
With my property, but that would not be possible here.
If your height requirements prohibit that, you know what that happens. Depending on what you choose, if your height and mass and the things that you choose prevent that, then yeah.
I mean, most two-story houses exceed the maximum height that we're talking about here, right? Yeah, because maximum height, the absolute maximum, even with some wiggle room, would be what?
So I think we said it was 17, so maybe 20. Probably give or take a couple feet.
So if somebody were to do something that was in violation, like of a height agreement, what repercussions would they face?
Well,